NCERT Class 6 Chapter 9 Data Handling. Very interesting and very scoring. So definitely practice questions on this topic. We'll first start by looking at some terminology. Then we'll move on to understanding the crux or the main portion of this chapter, including tally marks and how do we use them for counting. Then we'll understand how to draw bar graphs, especially we'll look at how to choose the right scale for drawing your bar graphs. Then we'll move on to understanding the horizontal bar graphs, and finally we'll look at problems involving reading information from the bar graphs. The last topic is the simplest and most exciting for the students, which is pictograph. So let's get started. Before we understand what data handling means, let's first understand what is it, what does the term data actually mean. So data is just a collection of facts. It's a bunch of facts which have been put together. It might be raw numbers, it might be in the form of numbers, or it might not be in the form of numbers. Here we have some numeric data about the student's height. I might also have non-numeric data, for example, students' preference of colors or their preference of particular brand of clothes. Okay, so those kind of data are actually non-numeric. Such data is typically collected by means of surveys or by means of questionnaires. I might have asked the students to fill out a very simple questionnaire which has their names and their height. So from that questionnaire, I was able to obtain this data. Data actually is a plural term. It is plural. The singular for data is datum. So a single fact, a single number would actually, we'll just call it datum. Now, this raw data, although it might look interesting, it might be useful in some circumstances, might not be, does not give me all the insight that I might need for a particular task. So for example, let's say that I wanted to create furniture for my classroom. I wanted to create the chairs and tables and blackboard and all of those things for my classroom. And for that, I need to understand what should my height of chair and table be. So in that case, this data would not be very useful. But if I do certain operations on this data, for example, if I find out the maximum height of a student, maximum or minimum height of a student, or if I find the range of height which fits or which puts in the maximum number of students, then that particular aspect of data is more useful. Statistics is the process by which we get that kind of insight from our data. We do data analysis using statistics, and that statistics is the result that we get from that data analysis. Statistics typically deals with two things. One is the interpretation of data and the second is presentation of data. Interpretation means that if I find the maximum, minimum, average, I am interpreting the data. I am looking at the data in a different ways to get more useful things out from my raw data. Presentation means to put the data in more useful forms, typically in the forms of tables, charts, etc., so that everyone can understand in a better way and everyone can derive some kinds of result from that data. So those are the two aspects of statistics: interpretation, in which we try to answer some question, we try to find out more information from our data, useful information from the data, and presentation. Before moving further, let's just spend a minute understanding the different kinds of data that we encounter. So here we have a table where we have given the student name, and against each student we have two things. The first is their fruit preference, the preference of the kind of food that they really like, and their height. Although the data might seem similar, the kind of data that we have here, the two kinds of data that we have here are indeed quite different. The first one, the fruit preference, can be only one of three types. Either it can be apple or orange or banana. So it can be one of those three types only. Such data, which can be classified into one of few types, is known as categorical data. The second data is not only numeric, it is numeric because it is made up of numbers, but it is also continuous. What does it mean? It means that the heights of students, it is not that the height could only be 3 feet or it could only be 4 feet. We can have any number of heights between 3 and 4 feet. Therefore, this height data is actually continuous. So those are the two main kinds of data that we really encounter when we are using statistics, when we are doing data handling. One is categorical data, such as the fruit preference, color, choice of clothes. Other is the continuous data. Continuous data is numeric. For example, it could be height, it could be weight, things which can take any number of values. With that understanding, with that basic understanding on the types of data, let's just understand how we can apply a very, very common, a very, very important statistic on these two kinds of data. The statistics is known as frequency. Frequency, as the name itself suggests, counts the number of occurrences of a given type of value in our data. So for example, if I were to count the number of occurrences of apple in fruit preference, so how many students actually like apple, if I were to count that, that would be the frequency of apple. Very, very simple. Similarly, I can also count the frequency of orange, banana, so on and so forth. In case of continuous data, the counting is done little differently, and we'll see that in a second. But let's just first focus on the categorical data and how do we count the frequency of categorical data systematically. Okay, simply you can count the value in the table and that would be a count as well, right? So I can count from here that the number of students who like apple is 2, but that wouldn't be a systematic method, that wouldn't be a very mathematical method. So we'll just count the apples, the fruit preference data. We'll count the frequency of fruit preferences using a systematic method. The first step is to actually devise another table. In that table, we have written each of these categories. We'll count how many times each of these categories, apple, orange and banana, occurs in our student table. So to do that, we start from the first row of our student table, and if the apple appears, if the fruit which appears there in the first row, we increase the count of that fruit by 1. So in the first row there was apple, so we increase the count of apple by 1. Now we move on to the next row. It was orange, so we increase the count of orange by 1. Very, very natural, very, very simple. So this is how we can simply and systematically count the number of occurrences of each of these fruit preferences. So in the next 2 rows we had banana, so the count of banana increased by 2. Then subsequently we have orange, banana, and then so on and so forth. So in this way, we have accounted for all the students in the student table, and we have counted their fruit preferences in our second table. The thing to note here is that there is a slight difference between the kind of data which is available in the first table, the student table, and the fruit preference or the second table, the frequency table. There is a difference between the kind of data which is available. Here, from this data, from the frequency data, we can answer questions such as which is the most preferred fruit. Okay, you will say it's banana. What is the most least preferred fruit? That would be apple. Okay, so those are the kinds of questions which are easily answered using this table. Whereas if we want to find out answers to questions such as who likes apple, who likes banana, that information is kind of missing from here. We don't have that information. For that, we will have to go back to the second table. So understand the difference, that we are able to count the frequency in the second table, but we are losing something in turn. So now with this information, we have counted for the frequency of each of the fruit preferences. In real life, when we are doing maths, drawing this symbol, although these apples and bananas, they look very beautiful, so you might be tempted to put those in. It is very hard to draw it in your examination copies. So typically mathematicians don't do that. Instead of using the actual symbols of apple and oranges and bananas, what they do is that they replace them by simple lines. So instead of using these symbols themselves, the fruits themselves, I replace them with lines here. These lines, these vertical lines, are known as telemarks. So we have these markings, and now we only have to count these markings instead of counting the fruits. Another thing to understand is that as soon as I have 5 of these telemarks, for example for banana I have 5 telemarks, instead of putting the 5th telemark towards the end, I would move that telemark and cross the other 4 telemarks that I already have. So I move this telemark and put it as a cross. So that is the notation of telemarks. It is very, very important to understand that. Now that we have these telemarks, it is very, very simple to do the counting. So how many students actually liked apple? 2, 1, 2. How many liked orange and how many liked banana? We can similarly count those. Notice that this group of 4 telemarks with a cross, we can simply look at the group and say that it is 5. So our counting becomes easier when we have grouped our telemarks in this way. Now we have understood how to do the telemarks, how to count the frequency for a categorical variable, which was fruit preference in our example. Similarly, we can also count, we can do the counting, we can do the frequency counting for even for continuous variable. For example, the height given here. How would we do that? So first, we don't really have any kind of ready-made categories for the height variable because it was continuous. So there is no, it can take any of the possible values. So there is no ready-made categories there. So we artificially categorize the height. How do we do that? We create ranges. These are known as class intervals. Okay, these intervals, these ranges, we have artificially created according to our own choice. And now we can classify the height into one of these four ranges. Process of doing the classification is actually very similar to what we did for the categorical variable. We'll start from the first row and we'll increment the count of the corresponding height range, right? So the first row is actually 3.1. So we'll increment the count of this range 3.0 to 3.9 right here. The second variable, the second row has 3.2. Again, we'll increment the count right here. Similarly, we'll go on for the third row, the fourth row and the fifth row. One of the things that you have to notice is that when we are creating this range, we need to make sure that the ranges do not really overlap. If there is an overlap in the range, for example, if 4.0 to 4.9, instead of that, I had 4.0 to 5, and here also I started with 5, then I would have trouble as to where should I put this 5. This 5 could be counted here or here. So avoid that confusion. When we are creating these class intervals, we do not overlap them, and it is very important to do that. When you are dividing this entire height into ranges, it is very important that you don't overlap. So we are continuing the process of counting. Each time we encounter a new height, we classify into one of these four class intervals, and it is very simple. We can see where the class interval is and we put it right there. Now that we have classified all the class intervals, all the heights into various class intervals, we can now count them. But before we do that, our tally marks have a little bit of problem. What is the problem? Here we have 5 tally marks. Okay, these are 3.0 to 3.9. There were 5 students with the height in this range, 3.0 to 3.9. But the 5 we don't write like this. It is against our convention. So we take the 5th bar and we mark it as a cross across all previous 4 bars. So with that, we have done our tally marks for the height as well. We were able to categorize artificially, mind you, our height as well. And now we can count our tally marks and understand how many students fall in which of these ranges. Notice that this data is actually very important. Remember, in the previous class, in the very beginning, we discussed that if I wanted to create furniture for my class, then I would like to understand where most of the students actually fall, in which height range most of the students actually fall, so that I can design my furniture accordingly. From this data, we have that. We know that most of the students fall in the range of 3.0 to 3.9, and therefore if I were to design the height of my tables and chairs, I would likely design it according to this height. So this data where we have divided the students into various class intervals is very, very important. It is very, very useful. It is providing us some additional information which was not available in the first table, not readily available in the first table. Now that we have counted the students, we have in both for their fruit preference and the height, both for a discrete, for a categorical as well as for a continuous variable. Let's understand how we can draw graphs for each of those variables. If we have a categorical variable, the simplest and the easiest kind of graph or the chart we can draw to depict that variable is known as a bar chart. Don't worry, we'll study bar chart, we'll look at bar chart in great detail, we'll understand how to create that. Here it is just given for a reference, for comparison. So if we have a categorical variable, the kind of graph that I would get is known as a bar graph. Okay, so this is the bar graph that I have drawn for that variable. Bar graph actually is very simple. On the x-axis, this horizontal axis is known as x-axis. The vertical axis is known as y-axis. Axis is just the name of the lines that we have here. Okay, they are imaginary lines here for which we have given them two names. On the x-axis, on this horizontal axis, I have put in all my categories. Very, very simple, right? So there are 3 categories: apple, banana and orange, and I have marked those categories right here. On the y-axis, I have given the number of students which prefer a particular category of fruit. So on the y-axis, I have listed this. On the y-axis, I simply depict the number of students. So my students can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is just number of students. Against each of these categorical variable, for example, against apple, I would draw a bar. Okay, and the height of the bar is simply the number of students which prefer that particular fruit. So from the table I can read that the number of students is 2 and the height of my first bar would actually be 2. From the table I'll read that number of students which prefer orange is 3 and the height of my orange bar would actually be 3. Similarly for banana the height would be 5 and indeed it is 5. So with that, with this simple graph can depict all the information given in this table in a very nice pictorial way, and from here also we can quickly read that most of the students like banana. So the graph would make our reading job little easier too, and also it makes our statistics look little more interesting. So this was the case with categorical variable. This is how we will depict the graph of a categorical variable. One of the optimizations that we can do in this graph is that to make it look more nicer, we will just order our categorical variables according to their height. So I start with decreasing height. Either I can have increasing height or I can have decreasing height, and that would just make it look nicer. There is nothing wrong with either of those graphs. Now let's move on to how we would actually do the same thing. How would we create a graph for a continuous variable? So this was a continuous variable, and the kind of graph the simplest graph that we can draw to depict the frequency of a continuous variable. Okay, so mind you, we are depicting frequency in these graphs. Okay, both of these graphs we are depicting the frequencies. The kind of graph that we will use to depict the frequency of continuous. So this is continuous variable, we know that. Continuous variable, the kind of graph that we would use is known as a histogram. Okay, the two graphs might look actually very same. In the histogram also we have the same thing. We have our height, which is our various ranges that we have on the x-axis. So this is where various ranges similar to the categories we had here. These are our various ranges we have on the x-axis, and on the y-axis again we have the number of students which fall in that particular range. So for example, in the range of 2.0 to 2.9, in this range the number of students was actually 1, and we have depicted that right here in the graph. Similarly, in the second range the number of students is 5, and that is what we have depicted. Third is 3, and that is what we have depicted right here. And in the fourth range the number of students is again 1, and that is what we have depicted here. Remember, for the fourth range the value that we had was a single value 5.0. And indeed at that point we said that instead of classifying it here, we would classify 5.0 here, because we had kept our ranges disjoint. 5.0 would fall into this fourth range and not in this range, right? At the time when we were classifying, we clarified that. So 5.0 actually fell here and not here. Now, when we are drawing the histogram, one of the things that you would notice is that there is no distinction between 2.9 and 3. That is the most important difference between a bar graph and a histogram. A histogram, because it is depicting a continuous variable, at the bottom on the x-axis I have continuous variable. That continuity is depicted by not separating the two bars, and that is very, very important. The bars of my histogram, they are attached to each other, they share a common edge. So both of these bars share the common edge of 3. Both of these bars, they share the common edge of 5, but it is understood that the value of 5.0 was accounted in this bar 5 to 6 range and not in this range, and that is clear by the way I have classified my data. So that is the main difference between the histogram and the bar graph. Histogram depicts a continuous variable. On the x-axis we don't have categories, we have continuous variable, and because it has continuous variable, I do not keep my different bars disjoint. So if you understand that, you have understood the two concepts very, very nicely. Bar graph and histogram, both are very similar, both depict the frequency of occurrence, one of categorical variables and the second one of continuous variable. The thing to note here is that in case of histogram, our bars are not disjoint, whereas in case of bar graph, these bars have to be disjoint. We cannot join them together. That is the most important thing. Of course, the histograms have some other properties also. The areas of these bars are very, very special, which we will study in another class. Now let's look at an example where we'll use our method of telemarks for counting the frequency. So here I have listed the number of books owned by each of the students in the class. So the first student owes 5 books, second student owes 7 books, so on and so forth. At the bottom in the table, I want to count how many students own 3 books? How many students owe 6 books? So that is the kind of information I want to take from the table, from the top table. So for that, I'll use our standard method of telemarks. I'll start by looking at the values in the top table. So the first value is 5. The first student owes 5 books. So I'll increment the count of 5 by 1. The second student owes 7 books. So I'll again increment the count of 7 by 1. The third student owes 5 books and so on. I'll increment the corresponding count by 1. The next few values are 6, 7 and 6. So again I'll increment those values 6, 7 and 6 again. One of the things that you should be careful when looking at the numbers and drawing the corresponding telemarks, you should take care that you do not count the same number twice. So for that, mark of the number somehow. So circle of the numbers or put a dash below the number, somehow mark of the numbers which you have already accounted. So next we have the values of 5, 6 and 6. So then we'll increment the count of 5 by 1 and 6 by 1 and then once more. Then we have the value of 5, 4 and 5. So we'll increment the value of 5 and then we'll increment the value of 4, and then for 5 again we have one more 5. So instead of drawing a mark right here, the fifth mark would actually cross the 4 marks that we already have. So that is the notation for tally. Then we have 7, 6 and 7. So again we draw 7, and again for 6 the fifth mark would cross the 4 bars that I already have, and then one more 7 I have right here. Then I have the next 3 values are 5, 7 and 6. So again I start the new group for 5. So one group for 5 is already complete. I start the next group for 5, and notice that I keep some distance between my previous group and the new group that I just started. So then I have 5, 7 and 6. So for 5 I started a new group. 7 I need to cross because it is the fifth value, and for 6 I again start a new group, again some distance away from the existing group that I have, complete group that I have. 4, 8 and 7. So this is 4, then we have 8 and then 7 again. So again we start a new group. Then we have 3, 7 and 5. So we do 3 and then 7 and then 5. Okay, so in this way we have created the telemarks for each of our students. Now from these telemarks I can get the count of students. So how many students owe 3 books? That would be just 1. How many students owe 4 books? That would be 2. How many students owe 5 books? So this is one group is 5 and then 6, 7. So notice how dividing my telemarks into groups of 5 really simplified my counting job. Then we have for 6 again 5 plus 1, 6, and then for 7 we have 5 plus 2, 7 and then 1. This table of telemarks is very important if I want to answer the questions such as number of books owed by maximum and minimum number of students. So if I want to find out the number of books owed by maximum number of students, so maximum number of students appear in these 2 rows. Right? Both of these rows have 7 students each, and what is the corresponding count of books? It is 5 and 7. So I can say that maximum number of books, the maximum number of students owe either 5 or 7 books. Okay, so those kinds of answer. Minimum number of students owe 8 books. There was only one student who owed 8 book, or 3 books. There was also only one student who owed 3 books. So minimum, maximum, average, those kinds of question can be answered by this table for tally. Again, if you approach it systematically, tally diagrams or tables with telemarks, they are very, very easy and very, very scoring. Now that we have looked at an example of drawing the telemarks and doing the corresponding counting, let's just see how we can systematically draw a bar graph given certain data. So here we have the expenses that a particular household does on various categories. So house rent, for example, is they expend 3,000 rupees per month on house rent. For food, this particular household spends 3,400 rupees, so on and so forth. And finally, we have some miscellaneous expenses as well. I want to plot these expenses in the form of a bar graph. The first thing to notice is that our expenses are categorized. So they are categorical variables. The second thing that we do when we are drawing the bar graph is to draw our y-axis, correctly draw our y-axis with the various markings. So here we have the various markings on the y-axis, and these have to be very correctly done, very correctly chosen, and rest of the process would become very simple. So to do these markings, first thing we do is that we look at the expenditure. I want all of these expenditures to appear in the marking here as far as possible. So to enable me to do that, what do? I take the SCF of all of these expenditures. So my expenditure here, right, one of the common factors that we can easily see across all of these expenditure is 100. They are all divisible by 100%, right? Because all of them have 2 zeros. So they are definitely divisible by 100. But as soon as I divide these values by 100, I quickly realize that the remainder, whatever I am left with, the quotient, is also divisible by 2 in each of these cases. So SCF for all of these values comes out to be 200, right? So you can find out the SCF by using this trial and error method, but it is very important to start with the SCF. Now that we know the SCF of these various values, I choose that SCF as the difference between my marks on the y-axis. So on the y-axis, this is known as scale of the y-axis. Each mark on the y-axis has a difference of 200, and this 200, where did I get it from? I got it from the SCF of my values. So that is my scale of the y-axis. It is known as the scale. Each centimeter, right, or each unit length of the y-axis represents an expenditure of 200 rupees. This is what this scale actually means. So this is my scale of y-axis, and it is very important to choose this scale correctly. Once you have the scale, the rest becomes simple. What do? I create these markings 200 rupees apart. So each of these marking becomes 200 rupees apart, and I slowly increment the values. I take the highest value to be my highest expenditure here. So I only need to go till 3400, but of course we go one higher, okay, just for the sake of it. Okay, then with the y-axis created, now I move on to my x-axis. So that's the second thing I do. On x-axis, things are very simple, because here I simply need to put down all the categories. So I start with the first one and I go on to list all the categories. Of course, I also create mark in the center. It is on either side of this mark I will draw my bar diagram. Okay, so I create a mark in the center so that my diagram looks neat, and on either side of this mark I'll create my bar graph. Next we start with the first bar. How long my first bar needs to be? It needs to, the house rent, this bar for house rent goes till 3000. So I'll take the house rent bar and I'll extend it up to 3000. So this is how I arrive at the first bar. The second bar of food goes till 3400. So this is my second bar. It arrives right here. And notice that how my bar is centered around the line that I drew in the beginning. The third bar for 800 would come. This 800 I can read from the y-axis, right? Very simple. If you don't have a chart paper or graph paper, use graph paper preferably, because these lines you will get automatically. But in case you don't have that, use the lines in your answer book itself. So your answer book itself might have single lines, so use that. If you don't have that either, you are using plain copy, then draw these lines by scale. In that way your bar graph would come out to be very neat. Okay, and keep these bars typically 1 centimeter apart. And similarly, this bar, the width of the bar, also keep it to be 1 centimeter. Okay, that would make things look good. This difference between the bar, you can take it as per your convenience, but these bars, there has to be a difference. You cannot join these two bars. Remember, if you join, then it becomes histogram, which we cannot draw in this case because our variable, underlying variable, is actually categorized. Okay, so this is a category of expenses. It is not continuous. So our bars have to be disjoint. They have to be difference. This difference you can keep according to your convenience, depending on how many bars you need to fit. So we have gone till education. We have drawn the bar of 800 length 800. This we have already drawn. Next we draw the bar for electricity, which is 400. Then we draw the bar for transport, which is 600. Then finally we draw the bar for miscellaneous, which is 1200. So all of those bars have been drawn, and this completes my bar graph. One of the things which is missing from this bar graph, which you should put, is the scale. Scale means we'll put here 1 centimeter is equal to 200 rupees. Okay, and that scale is actually necessary. That is the scale of our y-axis, and you should always put that. Again, all the other information we have captured, it is the bar graph of expenses, and each of these bar represents a expense category. So all of that information is something that we have already put in. Another thing which sometimes people would do is that they would organize these bars in descending or ascending order, but that is not necessary. In exam you don't have to do that, but if you are drawing something for presentation, if you are drawing it to show to your teacher, then do it. It will look good on your in your presentation. One of the very important things that we need to be careful about when drawing a bar graph is to choose the right scale. If our scale is improper, then there are two things which would happen. The first problem that we could encounter is representing these values on the bar graph might become very, very difficult. Okay, so for example, if you consider this this bar chart that we just drew, in this we chose our scale to be equal to our SCF, which means that each of these divisions on the y-axis is equal to 200 rupees. So that was our scale. One division is equal to 200 rupees. How did it make our job simpler? If we choose this SCF as our scale, then all the values which are given in this table can be read off directly from the y-axis. So they are directly represented on the y-axis. So for example, 3400 is there, 3000 is there, 800, 400, all of those values in the table are directly there on the y-axis. So drawing the bar chart became very, very easy. All we needed to do was read off a value from the y-axis and draw the bar of corresponding height. If this scale was not chosen properly, then one of the problems which could happen is that your bars would reach midway between these lines, and that would between these main divisions on the y-axis. Okay, and that would make your job that much more harder. The second problem which could happen if the scale is not chosen properly is that your bars can become very, very tall, and drawing tall bars, drawing tall bar graph, there are two disadvantages. One is that it is more error prone because you have to count those many divisions, so it is more error prone. Second, it is more time consuming. You have to mark off that many points on the y-axis, you have to label that many points on the y-axis, so it is more cumbersome to draw tall graphs. So to avoid those things, to avoid those problems, choose your scale very, very carefully. This is an ideal circumstance when we were able to choose the scale directly as the SCF, and in this way we were able to key off directly from the values written on the y-axis. This is, however, not always possible. This is an ideal circumstance. If this happens, well and good. You take the SCF as your scale, and if you do that and you are able to keep the bar heights between 12 to 15 centimeter, okay, so that is the maximum bar heights that I recommend. You never exceed the bar height of 12 to 15 centimeters ever in drawing a bar graph. And if you are able to do that by taking the SCF as your scale, then definitely that is an ideal circumstance. But as we'll see in the examples now, that is not always possible. For example, here we have several values which are given. If you take the SCF of these values, this comes out to be 1. Now if I choose the SCF as my scale, what would that mean? It would mean that my one division would be equal to 1 rupees. Now if I draw a bar graph using this scale, 1 division or 1 centimeter equal to 1 rupees, if I do that, then the height of the tallest bar would become 30. Now drawing such tall bars is of course very, very cumbersome. So we cannot do this. We cannot take the scale to be our SCF. This would make our bar graph very, very tall, and we might not be able to represent it on a chart paper at all. So we will not do this. We'll choose another option. We'll have to find another option for our scale. And to find a next possible ideal option, we'll go back to our data. We see what are the values. we'll notice that all the values here are even except for one value, 29. So ignore this 29 for just a second. What would happen if I choose the scale as 2 now? If I choose the scale as 2, all of these values except for 29 would be divisible by 2. So those would directly be represented on my y-axis again. So let's just do that. So I chose the scale as 2, which means that one of my divisions actually now means 2 rupees. Okay. On the chart paper, if you're drawing the same bar graph, then your one division would be equal to 1 centimeter. Okay. So you'll write it like this: 1 centimeter is equal to 2 rupees. If you were to draw this on a bar graph, here we have one division, and that one division is worth 2 rupees. So now I'll just mark off the other points on the y-axis. They will all be even numbers: 2, 4, 6, 8, so on and so forth. And now if you notice, if I start from the first bar, which is 24, 24 can be keyed off directly from the y-axis. We can read it off directly from the y-axis. We have a point corresponding to 24. Similarly for 26, 28, 30, 22, all of those points are there directly on the y-axis. The only point I need to really worry about is this one, 29. I need to deal with this separately. And for that, what do? Now for this, I go back to my 2 points, 28 and 30. 29 would lie between them, and I draw another line which divides this range of 28 to 30 into 2 parts. And this line, the middle line that I have here, is actually 29. So my bar of 29 would reach up to this line. And for that particular bar, I will have to do some additional work. I'll have to divide this range into 2 parts and so on and so forth. I'll have to do some additional work to create that 29 in this bar graph, but only for that particular bar. All the other bars I was able to nicely represent, and at the same time keep my bar heights to within 12 to 15 centimeter, that range. Okay, so that range is the key here. Don't let your bars become too high. Okay, so here we were able to choose another scale, a slightly larger scale, and still keep our work manageable. And we were able to represent most of the bars directly on the y-axis. Let's take another example. This time we'll choose an example where we'll have these values 20, 26, 30 and 35. Again, if you notice, most of these values, in fact all the values except 26, are actually divisible by 5. So we'll choose the scale as 5. If you choose that as a scale, okay, so what does that mean? It means that one of my division is worth 5 rupees. So this is my marks would now be 5, 10, 15, 20, so on and so forth. Now I'll start drawing my bars. The first graph bar would be 20 centimeter. Again, I can read it off directly from the y-axis. So very simple. All the other values, 30, 35 also, I can read directly from my y-axis. The only problem, the only value which will give me trouble is this value of 26. Now, to represent this value of 26, I go back to my bar graph. I notice where would this 26 fall? It would fall between 25 and 30. Very, very simple. So this region between 25 and 30, I now divide it into 5 portions. So I draw 4 lines for that. So these 4 lines between 25 to 30 would represent, this one would represent 26, the next would represent 27. Okay, I'll just write 7 here. The next one would represent 8, and this one would represent 9, and finally we'll come to 30. This line of 26 is what I am really concerned about. So now I go back here, and the February bar, I'll make it reach till this line of 26. Notice again, by choosing a scale of 5, we had to do a compromise. We were able to reduce the height of our bars, but at the same time I had to worry only about one value. Okay, so this is the rule that we have come across with these 2 examples. Choose a scale which would reduce the height. If you are not able to choose the SCF, okay, if that doesn't give you the satisfactory height of your bars, SCF is ideal. But if not able to do that, then choose the scale such that maximum number of values are divisible by that scale, and at the same time your bar heights are kept in a nominal range, in a nice range. For some values, you might have to compromise, okay? But that is okay. As long as you have chosen a scale judiciously, you have made sure that maximum number of values are divisible by that scale, only 1 or 2 values you will have to worry about. So that is the first thing that we have come across in these 2 examples. Another thing that we have come across in these 2 examples is that if I choose a scale of 2 or 5 and any of its multiples, right? So 2, 5, 10, 25, 4, 8, any of those multiples, when I divide the values, any number, by these values 2, 5 or their multiples, then my bar heights, I will be able to nicely divide two of my main values on y-axis, I would always be able to nicely divide two of my main values on y-axis. If I choose a scale, a weird scale, such as 3, 9, 7, then I might end up in trouble, because then I'll have recurring fractions, recurring decimals. I might have weird numbers which I would need to represent now between two of my main divisions on y-axis. So always, if you're not able to choose a nice SCF as the scale, then choose a scale which is either a multiple of 2 or multiple of 5 or a combination thereof. Let's now move on to the next example. In this example, we were neither able to choose a multiple, a scale of 2 or a scale of 5. Here we have given the population of India in crores. Of course, using a bar height, using a scale of 2 is out of question, because if I divide 84 by 2, my bar height would become very large. It would not be within 12 to 15 centimeter range. Similarly, I cannot just choose the 5 as the scale. That would also make it prohibitively expensive. So what do? I choose the scale as 10. It is always a good idea, okay? If you're not able to come up with any judicious scale, you don't have any nice numbers which are always divisible by 2, always divisible by 5, right? Because all of these numbers, none of these numbers are divisible by 5. And I cannot choose 2 as the scale, because 2 does not give me a nice height bars, okay? This 84 will become too long. So in that case, it is always okay to choose the scale as multiple of 10. So I can choose the scale as 10, 100, 1000. Why is that? I'll show you in a second. So if I choose the scale as 10, the first advantage that we get is the height of the bars I can quickly arrive at just by dividing by 10. Okay, so that is very, very simple. The second advantage is that when I start dividing these bars, these scale into values, I start creating subdivisions between 0 to 10. My subdivisions are actually nicely done if I choose a scale of 10 or 100, a scale divisible by 10. So let's just see this with an example. Let's just look at how would we represent 36. So here, one of my divisions is worth 10 crore of population. So from 0, 10, then I'll have 20, 30, 40, so on and so forth. My 36 would lie between 30 and 40. See, the first thing I notice is that this 36, 54 and 84, they are all even numbers. So I don't have to worry about odd numbers at all. So from here 30 to 40, I need to represent all the even numbers between 30 to 40. And what are all the even numbers? The first even number is 2, then I have 4, then I have 6 and then 8. So I need to only create 4 more divisions or 4 more lines, okay, or 5 divisions, 4 more lines between line of 30 and 40. I do that, and I'm able to represent 36 right here. So this is the 6 line of 6 and this is the line of 36, and I was able to represent 36. Similarly, we'll do it for 54. I'll start from here. I'll do 2, 4 and this is 54. So 54 can now be keyed off from this subdivision, and I can draw a bar of this much height. 84, I'll do the same thing. So this is 2, this is 4. Between 80 to 90, I create 4 more divisions. So this is 2, 4, and here I have a line of 4, and that will be my line of 84. So one of the things that you'll notice is that because I chose my scale as 10, I was able to very nicely represent all the numbers between any two main divisions. So between 40 and 50, I was able to represent all the even numbers very, very nicely. If I had to represent odd numbers, I could do that too. If I had to represent all the numbers, all I need to do is that instead of creating these 5 divisions, I need to create 10 divisions. But that is still possible to represent any of the values that I have here if I choose scale as 10. If I don't choose the scale as 10, if I choose some weird number, some number like 7 or 9, that is the scale, then it might not be possible to represent some of the numbers at all. I cannot draw the correct bar graph in that case. So that was the last thing that we need to remember. If you're not able to choose any scale, then choose a scale which is divisible by 10, 100, 1000, those numbers. Okay, it's a combination of those numbers. So to summarize from all of these examples, this is what we can summarize. This is all you need to remember when choosing a scale. The first thing is that you choose a scale which makes sure that your bar heights do not exceed 12 to 15 centimeter. That is the first thing. The second thing is that choose a scale which minimizes the height of your bar graph. That is the less amount of work that you would need to do. The third important thing is that if you are able to choose SCF as the possible value for your scale, then do that. That would make your job easier. Then you will able to simply read off the values from the y-axis. If you're not able to choose the SCF, then we start doing some compromises. The first compromise that we'll do we'll choose a scale such that maximum number of our values are divisible by that scale. And the values of scale that we'll choose are always 2, 5 or their multiples. If we are not able to, we have to do things quickly and we are not able to come up with any other scale, then choose a scale which is a multiple of 10. So 10, 100, 1000, okay. So not really multiple, but a power of 10. So it should be 10, 100, 1000, okay. One of those values, choose that. And that would, if you do that, then you don't have to use much of your, much analysis of the values and still be able to somehow represent all the values on your graph. So remember these things when drawing the graph. Do it nicely. Do not have do not cut your or rub across on your chart paper, and you will be able to score very well when drawing a bar graph. The bar graphs that we have been drawing so far used vertical bars, but that is not necessary. Sometimes the bar graphs can also use horizontal bars. The graphs are exactly equivalent. They depict the exact same information. The only thing which changes is we interchange the x and y axis. In the case of horizontal bar graph, our categories, they appear on the vertical or the y-axis, and our values, the corresponding values, they appear on the horizontal or the x-axis. So that is the only thing which changes between the two graphs, the only thing which you need to take care of. Typically, when you are asked to draw a bar graph, just asked to draw a bar graph, you will draw the vertical bar graph, unless you are specifically asked to draw horizontal bar graph. Vertical bar graphs are also known as column graphs. In exam, it is also, for exam purposes, it is also important to understand horizontal bar graphs. Why? Because typically when you are asked to find out the values, to read the bar graphs, you would be given horizontal bar graphs. So to read the values, horizontal bar graphs become important. To draw bar graphs, vertical bar graphs become important. Now let's move on to the next very scoring and important topic, which is the reading the bar graphs. How would we actually go about reading the bar graph? So the first thing, as soon as I'm asked to read a bar graph and answer some questions based on that, the first thing that I'll do is that how much of each of my divisions worth, okay, on the numeric scale. So there are two scales on the bar graph. We know that there is one numeric scale which represents the values, and the second is categoric scale, in which we have given various categories. The first thing I do is to understand the scale, or understand how much one of the division on my numeric scale it represents. So in this case, our scale is 1 division is equal to 5. Okay, this 5 it can be ton or kg. Okay, we are not given that, but to answer these questions we don't have to worry about that at all. All we need to understand is that 1 division is worth 5 weight of wheat produced. Okay, that's all we need to understand. Now once you have figured that out, you have understood the scale of the bar graph, then the second thing we understand is what are the categories. So in this case, I can clearly see that my various categories are different years and they are given consecutively. So I am working with consecutive years now, there are no gaps. Okay, so with that understanding, now let's try to understand, let's now try to answer the very first question. The first question is, what is the maximum production year? So all I need to do to answer this question, I need to find out the year in which there was maximum production of wheat. Okay, again, like I said, we are not worried about whether it was in kg or ton. We are only interested in finding the maximum value, and the maximum value would be for a bar which is the longest. So here the longest bar is for year 2002, and therefore my maximum production year is 2002. Very simple. Now I need to find out the minimum production year. In which year was the production of wheat minimum? So in this case, we look at the bar which is the shortest. Again, very simple. So shortest bar appears in 2003. So that is my answer. Now other two problems, we'll just move on to that, and those are slightly tricky. So here we are not only asked to look at one bar, but we have to compare things across bars. We have to find out the largest decrease in production. In which year did largest decrease in production happen? So to answer this question, first we need to find out the years in which there was a decrease in production. So from 1998 to 99, in 99 there was an increase in production. Our production increased from 15 to 25. From 1999 to 2000, there was a decrease in production. So in 2000, definitely there was a decrease in production, and the production decreased by how much? By one of these divisions, which means by 5. Okay, so that is the first thing I note. Another thing when solving the bar graph questions is that you can always mark the values. You can annotate the bar graph according to your own convenience, and that is very, very important. If you do these annotations properly, you are less likely to commit a mistake. Okay, we cannot keep all of those facts in our head. Okay, we cannot do that. So writing something on the side of the paper, on your rough paper, if you are attempting it online, then those things would make our job that much more easier. Next we see which other year did the production actually decrease. So from 2002 to 2003, we again noticed that our production actually decreased by how much? 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 bars. So each of these bars is worth 5. So therefore the production decrease was 25. Okay, 5 into 5, which is 25. Or you can also read it from here. So from 30 and 5, so the difference between it went from 30 to just 5. So how much was the decrease? 30 minus 5 or 25. Again, to answer this question, largest decrease in production, we need to look at 2 bars and understand how much was the decrease in production. So now we know that these were the 2 years in which there was a decrease in production, and the corresponding years were 2003, there was a decrease in production, and 2000, there was a decrease in production. The minimum or the largest decrease in production happened in year 2003 though, because in 2000 there was only a decrease in 5. Decrease of 5. In 2003 there was a decrease of 25. So largest decrease in production, when did that happen? It happened in year 2003. Very, very simple if you approach it systematically. Let's now move on to the last problem, which is again similar. Here we are being asked the greatest increase in production. So we have to find out in which years first of all increase happened. So increase happened from 1998 to 1999. So there was an increase in this year by how much? By 10. There was a decrease here, so no need to worry. The production remained same from 2000 to 2001. No need to worry. Then again from 2001 to 2002 there was a increase in production. By how much? By 10 again. Then again from 2002 to 2003 there was a decrease. So no need to worry about that at all. Now we have 2 years in which there was an increase in production, and in both the years the value is the same. So we'll answer to the last part is greatest increase in production was in both the years 1999 and 2002, and the production increase in production was 10. Okay, so that would be my final answer to the final part of this question. Again, very, very scoring, very, very simple problems, provided you approach these problems systematically. Let's move on to one of the favorite topics of all kids, of all children. This is their favorite topic, and which is pictograph. And of course, it has to be favorite because it is very nice and colorful pictures that we need to deal with those here. So of course, this is one of the favorite topics, and very, very scoring, mind you, very, very scoring topic for children. So here we have these pictographs, and pictographs are a way to represent the data, the tabular data that we have been seeing. Pictograph is our way to represent those in diagrammatic form. So here we have been looking at this pictograph all through the class, and this pictograph represents the count of number of students who, for example, like apple, who like orange, and who like banana. So from this picture I can understand that 2 students like apple, 3 students like orange, and 5 students actually like banana. So the same information, instead of writing those numbers numerically 2, 5, 3 and 5, I put them in more interesting way, and I write them as I depict them as pictures. Each of these pictures represent one fruit. So this is one pictograph in which our job was actually simple, because the values that we need to represent could simply be represented by the one fruit each. Okay, so each of these pictures, they represented only one count. Okay, and that made our job easier. But in some pictograph, for example this one, each of these pictures that we are drawing represents not one value but multiple values. So each of these trophies, for example, it represents not one but 4 students. Now when we are representing multiple values using a picture, then I'll come across a circumstance, I come across values which cannot be perfectly represented by complete pictures. So here is an example. We start by representing a value of 16. Okay, so this is a 16 which we were able to represent. This value of 16 we were able to completely represent using 4 of these trophies. So I had 4 trophies, and these 4 trophies, because 16 is divisible by 4, I was able to represent 16 using 4 full trophies or complete trophies. The next value I'm trying to represent, I need to represent is actually 14. But this 14 with this 14 I have some trouble. Why do I have that? Because this 14 is not evenly divisible by 4. So how many trophies should I draw? So what do? I take 3 full trophies. So each of these trophies represents 4. So these 3 full trophies, each of them represents a value of 4. So I get 12 from here. So this is 12. And then I am left with 2 more. I need to use a symbol for 2 more trophies. And for that, I create a new symbol in some way. I divide this picture into 2, and this half of the picture now represents 2 trophies. So instead of full picture representing 4, now I am drawing half the picture, and that represents the half the trophy represents a value of 2. So my final value becomes, I'll add now 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 2, which is equal to 14. So very simple, again not very complicated. The only thing we need to do here is that we need to create additional symbols for representing partial values. The next example, in the next one, we have to represent a value of 9. So 9 is again little bit tricky because 9 is 4 plus 4 plus 1. So this 4 plus 4 could be represented by 4 complete symbols, 2 complete symbol of trophies. Okay, so each of these 4 is complete symbol of trophy. I need to invent another symbol for representing 1. So what do? I cut this trophy into 4, and 1/4 of this trophy is drawn here to represent a value of 1. So 9 is represented by 2 full trophies and 1/4 trophy. What would this symbol represent? There is a half trophy and a 1/4 trophy. So half trophy represents 2, 1/4 trophy represents 1. So this value is actually equal to 3. Very simple. The last value is actually simple. We have 1 full trophy. So we can quickly say that this value is actually equal to just 4, and we are done. So that was one of the ways. So we have to represent these values also. Okay, we cannot just say that, oh, because my trophy is worth 4 students, I'll always have numbers which are multiple of 4. No, that is not the case. Sometimes we will have to represent values which are not multiple of 4. And in that case, we have 2 choices. The first choice is to actually invent new symbols like this that we have just done. The second choice is now what we will understand. We will not represent this value exactly. So this value 14, instead of representing it exactly, we will approximate this value and represent it with complete trophy symbol. So that is the second option we have, and we'll just understand that in a second. So the value of 16, I know I don't have to worry about representing it at all because 16 is divisible by 4. So I take 4 full trophies and I put them instead of 16, and I'm done. For 14, instead of representing the value of 14, for which I cannot representing using full symbols, so I round this 14 up. So instead of representing this 2, I round this 2 to 4. Okay, so I just change the value of 2 to 4, and instead of using a half trophy now, I can use a full trophy. So that is the second way, right? So one way to represent this 14 is to invent new symbols. But if we don't want to do that, if we are okay with approximation, then instead of representing 14, we represent the next number or the nearest number which can be represented or which is a multiple, or which is a multiple of 4, okay, which is divisible by 4, we represent that. So instead of representing 14, we represent 16. In some ways, we round the 14 to nearest multiple of 4, which is 16. So again, we have to go back to our chapter 1 where we discussed rounding. Now, in the next case also, we will do the same thing, but instead of rounding up, okay, we will round down to a number which is actually a multiple of 4. So this one will completely ignore. We'll say that I will not represent 9 at all. I'll approximate 9 with just 8. And because of that, we don't have to invent this new symbol, and we just take it away. And we are saying that I approximate this 9 with a value of 8, which can be represented using complete trophy symbols. The next example again is 3, where we had to use these weird trophy symbols. We don't want to do that. We want to represent this value of 3 also using complete trophy symbols. To do that, I round this 3 up to 4. I take it to the nearest multiple of 4, which is 4 itself. So I take this value of 4 and I represent, instead of representing using 2 of these symbols, I represent the value now using a single symbol. 4 is of course a multiple of 4, so we don't have to worry about it at all. I can simply represent 4 as a complete trophy. So now this is the second way of doing the same thing. These values 14, 9, 3, these values we can represent these values which are not a multiple of 4, we can represent in two ways. Either we create new symbol for those, for these values, just to accommodate these values. Either we create new symbols or we approximate, and both of these things are okay. We can do either of these things, provided depending upon what has been asked in my question. So read the question carefully, whether it is allowing you to approximate. If it's allowing you to approximate, use complete symbols. If the question is not allowing you to represent it, it asks you to represent things exactly, in that case you should invent new symbols, use half symbol, use 1/4 symbol, and represent the value exactly. Both of those things are okay depending upon your exact circumstance. Now let's finally look at some of the more advanced topics that we would be discussing in subsequent classes. The most important and the most basic of those topics is the measures of central tendency. Now those are at the core of statistics, and there is a class already on those, so definitely listen to that class. So those topics are very important, especially for Olympiad. The next important thing that we would be discussing is the histogram. We'll go into the details of histogram and look at some of the statistical properties. The third topic that we would be discussing, and there are already some classes on this, are the pie charts and line graphs. How do we draw them and how do we read them? Those are very important part of data interpretation questions. Finally, the bar graphs are very important, and there are many variants of bar graphs. The two most important ones are stacked and clustered bar graphs, and we would take separate classes on those and show you how to draw these bar graphs which show related quantities all together. So stay tuned for these classes. If you have doubts or questions, do put them in the comment section below. I would be looking at those and giving you answers to those questions. Thank you.